Senator Cruz, if you'd be kind enough to take this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Thomas-Greenfield, congratulations. Welcome.
Thank you.
I've for a long time believed that the single greatest geopolitical threat facing the United States is China, and the communist government in China is a profoundly malign influence. I am also growing increasingly concerned over the last 2 weeks by a pattern among Biden administration nominees of consistently moving towards and embracing the Chinese Communist Party. That pattern became even worse this morning in an article that broke in the Washington Post that described a speech you gave just a little over a year ago in October of 2019 to a Confucius Institute. Confucius Institutes are paid for by the Chinese Communist government. We have had repeated problems of espionage and propaganda. That's why the Chinese Communist government funds Confucius Institutes. Congress has passed bipartisan legislation cracking down on Confucius Institutes, legislation I authored that passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. At the same time that the United States Congress and the United States government is acting to combat the spying, the espionage, the propaganda coming from Confucius Institutes run and controlled by the Chinese Communist government, according to the Washington Post, you were apparently going to a Confucius Institute, giving a paid speech, and praising China. How do you reconcile those two?
Senator, thank you for asking that question again, and I have addressed some of these issues earlier on in this hearing. I went to Savannah State University at the request of Savannah State, a historical black college that I have had a long-term relationship with, to give a speech on Africa and U.S. and China policy toward Africa. I got a $1,500 honorarium from the university for spending several days engaging with their students, talking to their students about careers in the Foreign Service, talking about issues related to Africa. I expressed to this committee early on my strong and frankly unacceptable what I saw in terms of what the Confucius Institute was doing in Georgia. I saw them engaging in poor black communities with the poorest of people. It is the same thing that I've seen in Africa, and I was appalled by it. And I've expressed my strong regret for having given that particular speech at Savannah University, and if I had it to do all over again, I would not have accepted. I have spoken about China for 35 years of my career working across the continent. In 2005, I raised a concern about the Chinese sending back North Korean defectors to certain death. I have raised concerns about how the Chinese engage in Africa and how their malign influences and their efforts have undermined the prosperity of the African people. And I see what they're doing at the United Nations as undermining our values, undermining what we believe in. They're undermining our security, they're undermining our people, and we need to work against that. So I appreciate you raising that for me again, and I want to say in no uncertain terms that I look forward to working with this body to address these issues. You've taken some incredible steps, such as, and seeing some of the reports that this body has taken related to China, and I support all of those steps, and I will be working aggressively against Chinese malign efforts in New York.
So you've said you were horrified by seeing firsthand what the Confucius Institute was doing. Did you keep the money?
I can tell you what I did with the money. I give a tremendous amount of my very meager resources to humanitarian efforts. And
so you did keep the money, though? You didn't give it back?
I did not give it back. It was not from the Confucius Institute. It was from Savannah State
Now,
University.
you also described, you said you've spoken out against China's abusive practices. Perhaps you have elsewhere, but I can tell you I'm holding the speech you gave at the Confucius Institute, and I can't find a single word of criticism in this speech. This speech is cheerleading for the Chinese Communist Party. You praise the Belt and Road Initiative. You praise their entrapping developing countries in debt bondage, and you say the United States should follow China's model. Is it the role of America's UN ambassador to be cheering on the Chinese Communist Party at the expense of the developing world and at the expense of America?
Senator, it was not my intention, nor do I think that I cheered on the Chinese Communist Party. What I recommended in that speech is that Africans need to open their eyes on how they deal with the Chinese. And I would like to see the United States government do more in Africa to compete with
My final question, did you have even a word of criticism about the Chinese Communist Party, about its murders, about its tortures, about its concentration camps, about its genocide? Did you have even a word of criticism in the speech you gave at the Confucius Institute?
I spoke about human rights there. That's the speech, but you don't see my other engagements with students who ask questions that I answered frankly. And I don't ignore human rights. I talk about the fact that Africans like our
But in the
values.
speech, did you address human rights?
I did. Human rights is referred to as something that we promote in the United States.
What did you say
are
about human
things
rights in the
that
speech?
are our values.
What did you say about
I mean, in my discussions with Africans.
But the
I
speech didn't
appreciate
have
what you're
anything.
saying. I'm not denying this. As I said, I regret this. This is one speech in my 35-year career, and I do regret that speech. But if you look at what I have done prior to that, there is no question that I understand. I am not at all naive about what the Chinese are doing, and I have called them out on a regular basis, including today.
Thank you.
We'll turn to Senator Young.
No problem. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Ambassador, welcome to the committee. Chinese leadership of specialized agencies, its influence peddling to secure leadership positions, and its failure to abide by the basic codes of decency are all problems facing the United States now, today, within the United Nations system. If confirmed, how will you use the power of America's vote and voice on the Security Council to hold China accountable for its behavior within the United Nations and beyond?
Senator, thank you for that question, and I see that as my highest priority, if I'm confirmed, at the United Nations, and that is to push against Chinese influence in the Security Council. And it will mean working with our allies and bringing them on board and getting their support to push back against the Chinese. And as I said earlier, calling them out every opportunity that we have on their efforts to have greater influence on the United Nations and to bring a set of values to the United Nations that does not fit the organization that we all support.
So let's tease that out, and I'm going to unpack that a little bit. So you'll work with partners and allies to apply greater leverage. That makes some sense to me. How will you approach this differently than the previous administration? And you'll note that the most recent ambassador to the United Nations was sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party because she was too forceful on these issues. So what will you do differently in this capacity than has been done by the previous administration?
I commend Ambassador Kraft for her extraordinary work in New York, and I have engaged with her and look forward to continuing to engage with her on what she was able to achieve effectively and follow through on her achievements. But I think one of the failings of the administration, and I don't think it was any fault of hers, was that we didn't engage our partners. We didn't bring our allies in with us. We didn't have discussions with them. So we need to, if we're going to succeed, we have to do it hand in hand with like-minded countries. And I intend to aggressively and relentlessly pursue working with those who are like-minded, ensure that they understand we're not ignoring them. We want them as partners, and we know that we can only succeed if we have their support.
So, Madam Ambassador, I would note that in the Obama administration, which preceded, of course, the Trump administration, we had the People's Republic of China ripping off our intellectual property, forcing technology transfer, engaging in human rights abuses. Really the same litany of challenges we're still dealing with. Did they, too, fail to make deepening and broadening our alliance system and leveraging that alliance system to bring China into a position of good behavior? Did they fail to make that a high priority?
I know, having served in the administration, that fighting against China was a high priority of the Obama administration. The pivot to Asia was about addressing the situation with China. But how China is behaving now is very, very different than that period, and they've become more aggressive. And so we have to change our approach, and we have to make our approach more strategic, and that is our intention.
I think there was some conversation earlier in response to questions by my colleagues pertaining to the United Nations budget and our dues. The United States remains the largest funder of the United Nations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we're going to maintain a lot of leverage just on account of that fact, presumably. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, but we also have to pay our dues if our influence is going to continue.
So you don't think that dues can also be one of these instruments that would give us greater leverage within the institution?
I do believe that dues are important, and I believe that we need to pay our dues so that we can continue to exert our influence.
Okay. But should those dues be tied to results or behavior of those within the UN system at all? Just trying to get clarity on your position.
We really do have to demand reforms in the UN system. We have to work within that system to ensure that those reforms are on the table and that we're pushing those reforms forward. We have to encourage the UN to be more efficient and more effective. We have to push for whistleblower protections for those who will provide the needed information.
I think I'm out of time. Respectfully,
sorry.
Madam Ambassador, I regret I'm out of time. It sounds to me like there's some strategic ambiguity, which I think is smart. So it sounds like you may be willing to use dues as a tool to bring some members of the UN system into a position of better behavior and fulfilling their mission, which is kind of what the previous administration attempted to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Young.
Thank you.